You're listening to the Sidecar Show, presented by Slow Phil, brought to you by Steve English, the guy who's keeping the Slidey community alive. Get involved. If you have news or announcements, or if you just want to have your say, email slowphil@steveenglish.com or call Slow Phil direct on 077 307 84975. Now just relax and enjoy the show.
It's the all-new Sidecar Show. We've got quite a big interview with Mike Richards this week. I haven't been to any racing. I'm going to the classic motorcycle show at Darlington next weekend. I may even have a ride, I don't know. But I'm going to get some good interviews down there with the competitors and maybe with some of the officials to find out really why they're able to get a full grid whilst everybody else, including the top of the tree British F2, they can't seem to do that. But we're going to try and find out next weekend. I'm Slow Phil in the workshop at MR Equip. I've got Mike Richards on my left. Mike, what's this thing on the bench? It's just gorgeous.
This is a 16-inch 750 BMW, which is the sister bike to the one I built in the winter for John Perkins. He's racing that in the Classic Club, and so far I think he's rode it 3 times, 3 meetings. He's had, I think, 5 wins in a second. He's broke the lap record everywhere he's gone. And at Cadwell, the highlight was he finished second on the road in the big class, and he's really enjoying it. It's so this is one that I built as a spare, and now I'm finishing it off. So that's what I'm doing with that film.
So you've got somebody for this already?
Possibly, yeah.
Oh, it's just one of those things. Yeah. But it's so, it just looks so lovely. It's almost like a sculpture. You could have this on the wall somewhere in an art gallery, and it's more real art than a lot of stuff you see.
Yeah, I think the 16 inches look more period and look more pure, as I said last time, and it's my favourite bike to look at. I like looking at them. I think they look dead right. So
it looks great, Mike, but I mean, is it real racing? How fast are these bikes?
These bikes are extremely fast, especially up to the 1300 class, where they use 1040 BMWs, 1200 Imps, big Triumphs, big Westlicks. And a couple of years ago at Cadwell Park on the full circuit, John Perkins was riding one of my BMW chassis, and a young lad from Scotland, Colin Lewis, was riding a big Triumph, and they were on their own, but their lap times would have put them within a couple of seconds of the top F2s in the country, so they are very fast.
So it's a real race. And are they all on treaded tyres?
They're all on treaded tyres. The big ones, up to 1300s, we tend to use a 13-inch rear wheel, which has got a 5-inch contact patch. We use Avon Formula Ford racing car tyres. And on the 750 class, predominantly they use 16-inch tyres, which are 3.5 inches wide. But then you can also use a 10-inch wheeled outfit, which again is 5 inches wide.
So that sort of brings me back to a point I made last week about the cost of F2. Why can't we do that? Why can't we have a single tyre?
It should have been from the word go. I was at the original meetings, and in my opinion it should have been from the word go a control tyre, and there's plenty of good tyres around, but the people who voted against it are the people who've got money, because with slicks go off, and if you can keep putting fresh tyres on, you've got an advantage.
But you also have to have another 6 wheels. If you're going to have everything in inters, it's another 6 wheels at cost of whatever per wheel. It's just more.
A set of wheels for an F2 with discs. I use twin discs on the front. By the time you've got tyres on them, you're probably looking at well over £2,000 for a set of wheels with tyres. One set. Yeah.
So that's £6,000 that you might never use in a season.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got to have that money.
Yeah, and like I said, if you keep putting fresh tyres on all the time, you've got an advantage.
Yeah. It's one of those things where there will always be this discrepancy between what you need and what you've got in the van.
Yeah. But like I said from the outset, the rules should have been a control tyre, a soft compound road tyre, or something of that thing.
Yeah.
It's an even playing field then. It's an even playing field for the chap who's got loads of money. It's an even playing field for the chap who doesn't put a lot of money into it.
I mean, there's a lot of people like me that when I've been racing in the past, everything I've got has gone into it, and there's always something else that you can't afford.
Yeah, like my attitude when I was racing, I didn't have a great deal of money, but I used my engineering skills to tune my engines, to come up with a fuel injection system. I had a special ignition made, which was the main factor, which was holding my engines back. And I spent money at it, but I didn't spend a fraction of what some of the top teams were spending.
But your skills, obviously you're a legendary engineer really, but your skills are currency as well that some people haven't got, and you have to then turn to somebody like yourself and pay them, don't you? So it is currency, even though you didn't get your hand in your pocket as much as anybody else.
Yes, well, obviously there's skills for horses for courses. Some people are good at something, and that's what I do for a living. I understand that, but there's other people who absolutely threw a fortune at it, and they're still sort of mediocre.
But they're the great Medal of Honour when you pass that guy and you know you've spent so much less than he has.
It's a great achievement, and it makes it worthwhile.
Of course. So back to this bike that's on the bench. When it does get sold and it's out there, where's it going to be?
It'll be all over the country. This one could end up abroad, actually. I've got 2 or 3 people who are interested in it. I'd say at the minute 60% of my work goes abroad. Yeah. And I am we've got a house in France that we're doing up, and within the next probably 2 years I will have a workshop set up in France. And I will probably move a lot of my work over to France.
And I suppose because these things, you don't buy one every day, it doesn't really matter where it is, does it?
Not really. Like I say, 60% of my work goes abroad, and a lot of the foreigners come here. I've actually built bikes for people. I've never ever met them. They do me a bank transfer, and I never even probably most times I never meet them until they pick it up. They've seen my bikes, they know what I do, they know how much it costs, they do a bank transfer, and then they come and pick the bike up when it's finished.
Or it gets crated up and you never meet them.
That's right, I never see it.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Okay, Mike, so these bikes, we all know the classic scene's really healthy. But what auspice, what club are they racing under?
These bikes race, in Britain they race under the CMRC, which is the Classic Motorcycle Racing Club. The chairman of the Classic Racing Club is also a sidecar racer called Ian Johnson. He has one of my chassis with an imp in it. And basically Ian, up until a year ago, was the eligibility man for sidecars. Ian's not a thoroughbred sidecar man, but what he does, he tends to take advice from 3 or 4 of us, and then he makes his own mind up, which I think is a very good thing to do. So basically the Classic Club make their own rules, and they race under them, which luckily they have nothing to do with the FSRA, because if the FSRA got involved, then they would probably kill the class. And as most people know, I'm not a great fan of the FSRA.
Right, well, I know that, but surely the proof is in the pudding. What are the grids like?
The grids at Classic Racing at Donington next week, there are 6 reserves.
So they're actually running through the grid, and they've got people waiting?
Yep. They will all practice, and if somebody blows up in practice, then somebody else will get a ride. Right. And at the minute it is absolutely thriving. It's actually bigger on the continent.
So what's the reason? This is what we're aiming for.
The main reason
in every
is
class.
Because it's to do with cost. one of the things is cost, because when I build a classic bike, when it rolls out of here, it's actually worth more money than when they've paid me. When an F2 rolls out of this workshop, they've just lost at least $5,000.
Right. And why is that?
Well, this bike, if you wanted to buy this bike, you wanted to buy the bike, it's a lot of money, they couldn't afford to race it this year, you could put this bike in a shed for 10 years, bring it out in 10 years, and it'd still be competitive.
Because it's a classic and it's not cutting edge.
It's up to 1972 rules. You've got to, there's the rules, you've got to build it within a set of rules so it looks period.
Yeah,
right?
it's a formula, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the trouble with the Formula 2 is, as soon as you roll it out, it's out of date.
Right.
And especially with the Formula 2s now, with the engine situation, with so-called standard engines, every year they build a more powerful engine, a lighter engine. That engine comes out, your bike is fitted for one engine. That's it, it's out of date.
Right, and so if they, it's never going to happen, but if instead of having a cross-the-frame 4, if they turned out with a boxer 4, obviously the cross-the-frame bike's finished.
Yeah, it's whatever.
If they just lean the barrels forward instead of being upright or whatever, that frame is finished.
Well, not necessarily. Like these days, we used to build, like with the classics, you build the chassis to the engine.
Yeah.
But on like the F2s, now and I've done it, my competitors do it, you put them on plates.
Yeah.
So that you can change.
So you change the plate and the motor's more or less in the same place.
That's right, yeah. But even then, it's still a lot of work. You've got to keep updating, you've got to change the exhaust, you've got to change the electrics, you've got to change the engine plates. It's still an expensive job to keep up to date. The 600 so-called standard engines, which they're not, in my opinion, doesn't really work because they don't police it properly, and they never have done.
Yeah. Well, I said in the show last week that making the head standard has perhaps actually excluded more people, because people are spending so much more money in the crankcases downstairs, where it's hard to get the power from. But you actually put a standard engine next to it, it's just not the same.
Yes, but here we go again, it's money rules again, because below the cylinder head, now people are putting these American pistons in at vast expense, so they're not standard engines. I also hear rumours, and whether it's correct I don't know, I haven't got proof, but I also hear there's two of the top teams are running MotoGP engines.
So it's not even a road bike engine?
No, it isn't. No, it's homologated because they built 200 of them.
Right.
But that doesn't come in with Formula 2 rules.
No. And as I said to Pat last week, that part of bringing in the formula in Formula 2 was to try and limit the expense and let people like me race. I can't afford to give a whole year's money for a bike. In an ideal world, I want to be able to buy a bike for $5,000. I know that's never going to happen, but you can't buy an F2 for $5,000 and run at the front.
No, you can't, and let's be realistic, you're never going to. Even these classics are a lot of money. But the FSRA, in my opinion, and I know lots of people will argue with me, but the FSRA have caused the problems with low grids in F2s, and in F1s for that matter, by the way that they have controlled the rules, or people on the committees have controlled the rules with self-interests over the years. And in my opinion, they've totally ruined the class for the working man.
I sort of understand what you're saying, Mike, but I'm sure you'll agree with me that these people are doing this for nothing, and although sometimes you don't agree with what they're doing, if you've got to have somebody, who else is going to do it?
I certainly understand that you've got to have a committee. I was one of the first ones. I wasn't on the committee, but I was involved in voting and what have you when there was no such thing as the FSRA. It was the Formula 2 Sidecar Club, and that was going along quite nicely until all of a sudden what I call the F1 people came into F2, because at the time in the late 80s, early 90s, there was quite a bit of money floating around in the F2 series. And a lot of the F1 jockeys who couldn't really hack it at world level decided to come to F2. So then all of a sudden you've got ex-Grand Prix runners in Formula 2 throwing bucket loads of money at Formula 2s, contriving the rules so that they could do that, and nobody stopped them.
I mean, it's always the same, you know better than I do, but people will sometimes buy their way forward, and then it doesn't matter how much talent you've got, because you just can't keep up.
Yes, you know, you can, if you're a crap driver, you can throw £1 million at it. It's not going to make you into a winner.
No, but I mean, if you're a medium runner,
yeah,
you can
progress a little bit. Yeah.
Buy your way forward.
Yeah, I'm really sad actually that the FSRA have let the Formula 2 get into this situation. And as people know, I've had quite a few run-ins with the FSRA, starting in the early 90s with. They decided that the Formula 2s were going too fast. So basically they came up with an idea of putting restrictors in the inlets to try and slow them down a bit. And at the time, the first restrictors were 34mm. At the time, I ran a Kawasaki which had oval inlets. Anyway, they were going to ban the Kawasaki, and I didn't want to put...
But it was an oval inlet as standard?
Yes.
Right.
And I didn't want to put round restrictors into my inlet rubbers, and basically it said it was a 34mm cross-sectional area. It didn't say 34mm diameter.
No.
So my passenger was on the committee, Gary Blunt. I went to a committee to prove to them that the actual inlets were standard, were under 34mm. I took a Zeus book, a vernier, and a calculator,
yeah.
And even the technical people are so stupid they couldn't even work out the cross-sectional area of an oval.
Which is a simple calculation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But anyway, at that particular meeting, I took the rubbers and all the rest of it. And then a certain member, a technical member, who was on the ACU road race committee as well, suddenly produced, which I've never seen before and I've never seen since, an ACU white sporting code book.
Yeah, I've heard of this before.
He then produced, unbeknown to me, this is, in my opinion, is just to restrict the Kawasaki's. The Kawasaki's were going really well at the time, and I was doing a lot of business. I was tuning Kawasaki's. Yeah. And he then produced in this book that you weren't allowed oval inlets. Well, I've never seen that book. It wasn't in the ACU standard handbook, and he produced that.
But surely if it's not available to a competitor, it's not a legitimate rule.
It probably was available, but you had to ask for it. But I didn't even know it existed, and nor did anybody else.
And if you don't know it's there, you can't ask for it, really, can you?
So we put round restrictors into the inlets, and it totally knackered it.
Yeah.
So
just killed the speed.
It was the end of the Kawasaki.
Yeah.
So that was my first running with the FSRA. The second running. Why I'm saying all this is explaining why I'm against the FSRA.
Yeah, I understand.
The second run-in with the FSRA, I decided to make a mechanical fuel injection system for my Kawasaki for various reasons. Obviously, one being power. And I'm a CNC machinist by trade, so I made it all. I CNC turned all the trumpets. I bought an American Hillborn fuel pump. I belt drove it. But before I did all that, I actually rang the ACU and I said, there's nothing in the handbook about fuel injection. Am I allowed to do it? And they said, well, there's nothing stopping you. But basically, if somebody objects and they try and ban it, you'll have 12 months grace.
So it's worth it because you know you've got one season.
Yeah. So I also rang, I think it was the Formula 2 club then, I forget what it was. And I said, have you got any restrictions on fuel injection? No, nothing at all. Anyway, I finished it on the Thursday, and it actually gave 8 horsepower more. It was a lot smoother, and I'd finished it, and we were all set to go. Then there was a meeting at Donington on the Sunday, the Thursday after I'd had it on the dyno, and on the Sunday they banned it. No 12 months grace.
So all the work, forget about the money, all the time you'd spent thinking it up and how you're going to make the drive and bits from America and all that, just completely out the window.
Scrap.
Unbelievable.
And they also did it, and their main reason was they were frightened. What they said at the time was they were frightened of people spending megabucks on fuel injection, And Neil Smith had put a Ducati into an F2, which in them days was perfectly allowed to do. You were allowed 1000cc twins.
Twin cylinder, yeah.
So basically, Neil had to put carburetors onto his Ducati, which ran terrible. And then, just to add insult to injury, they banned big twins as well.
And so that was the whole bike was no good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No 12 months grace.
But, I mean, you can sort of see it in a way with what you were saying about your fuel injection system. You can sort of see it because if everybody did that, or if you weren't doing it yourself, you would have had to spend a lot of money. It would have been the value of a bike, wouldn't it?
Not really, because at the time, I actually ran CV carburetors on my Kawasaki, and I started 41 races and I won 33. Other people said that CV carburetors don't work, and they were all buying flat slides in from America, and at the time I think they were about £800.
Yeah.
My fuel injection system cost a damn sight less than that, and even if I'd have sold them to other people, which I was doing products, I made my own valves, I was selling valves, I could have sold it cheaper than you could buy a set of flat slide carburetors.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the flat slide carburetors in the solar world were always the thing to have, but always a bone of contention because of the cost, and they didn't live very long. They were.
But I remember the arguments at the time when they were all on about allowing them in. They should never allow them in. I put a Dynajet Stage 7 into my CVs and they worked fine. Other people, I remember arguing at AGMs and they're saying they don't work. I've just won 31 races. Of course they work.
Yeah.
But the people who got the money thought they'd have an advantage with flat slide carburetors. So here we go again. Here's the start of the money people coming in
and just buying their way forward.
Exactly.
And then people who perhaps aren't that technical think that you've got to have this and you can't run without this, and so they have to spend the money, and then all of a sudden every bike on the grid is worth so much, and you can't come in unless you spend so much.
It's like the bone of contention now with Motec. If you haven't got the people who haven't got the Motec hate it because it's an unfair advantage. But the problem is it should never have been allowed in the first place. They should have allowed kit ignitions, and now you cannot say to people who've just spent 8-10 grand on Motec with data log and all, you cannot expect them to throw it in the bin.
So how do you do it? How can you possibly? I mean, I'm not a British championship runner. I just want to be in a club. But then everybody in the club wants to do the same thing and buy the Motec or buy something, AIM or something. Yeah. So how do you stop that little piece? How do you stop that ignition coming into it?
I don't think you can now because too many people have got it. They should have done it from the outset. It should have been kit ignitions or power commanders or whatever, just simple stuff that you can buy. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, the Motec for data logging and that is a good thing. It's not just Motec, there's plenty other things for data logging. But it's the same again. It's the same with the Hondas. One of the reasons why the difference between a HRC kit and the Motec kit is it lets it rev out.
Right. And it's more capacity, the more revs you can get, and if it's all working together, it's just more capacity, isn't it?
But it's, we're back to it again, spending loads of money.
Yeah. And do you think that when we get right back to basics, do you think that's simply why the classics are so healthy now?
I think yes, because the technology in a classic is a lot more simple.
Yeah.
It's the bloke in his shed. I'm doing a kit now for a chap in Portugal, and he's going to build his own BMW. And I fully encourage people to do their own thing. Just because I build chassis doesn't mean I won't help people who want to build their own bike.
No, but I mean, isn't that sort of how? Certainly, how the flavour that I had when I was a kid, sort of walking around the paddocks, that the solos were one thing, and the serious end of the solos were one thing, but the sidecars, the guy running at the front might have bought it, but he also might have made it. And it was just a completely different flavour.
The thing is, in the 60s and 70s, there weren't really any, in the early 70s, there weren't really any purposeful manufacturers. Alright, you had John Crick and Terry Windle. They were probably the first to start semi-productionising it and knocking a few bikes out. And there was a few people, Fidderman sort of tried to make a business of it. There was quite a few people who built one-offs and two-offs, but nobody's sort of doing it as a business properly.
And it's like you say, they didn't have the engine plate sort of technology idea.
No.
So every bike was different. And if the engine got that you couldn't go any faster with it, you had to have a new bike.
Yeah.
And so everything was different.
But the main, I would have said in the 70s, the main leap forward really was Terry Windle. He produced some really good stuff, and you could order a new bike, and there was a waiting list for bikes because somebody, compared to what you could make in your garage to what he was making, it's chalk and cheese. And that's how it's evolved over the years. But with the classics, you can still make your own chassis and be competitive. Where in F2, yes, you can still make your own chassis, and a few people do, but it's very expensive to do it. And why would you when you can buy one off the shelf?
And obviously it's as I say, the currency is different, but it's still currency. If a man had the space and the skills to build an F2, would probably take you 2 or 3 months if you're on it, wouldn't it?
A lot more than that.
Do you think?
Yeah, I've done it. I've built one-offs in my garage at home.
Yeah.
And as a part-time, doing every evening and weekend, it'll take you a year.
Really? Yeah. And so that's this year gone, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's more from Mike in a few minutes. First, we're going to have that word from our sponsors, like all commercial radios have to do. But if you remember, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. One of the adverts is actually for a speedway school, and I said, how can that be so hard? It can't be that bad. There's no brakes, there's no gears. Well, it's something you don't have to do. And the next thing you know, the phone was ringing, and it's the fellas from the Speedway show on Biker FM, and they've got me a gig. I'm going there on the 31st of August to Buxton, to the Speedway school, and they're going to let me go on a full race bike. And you know how they call me Slow Phil? Well, let's see how slow I'm going to be. If I don't die, I'll be very surprised. No, I think it's great. I think it's a right good crack, and I really appreciate them coming to me and let me have a bit of a go in their sport. I have said that we could perhaps sort out a passenger ride for one of the guys, or for both of them, Chris and Paul. But I haven't got a bike at the moment, as you know. So if anybody out there fancies putting the fear of God into the Speedway guys, get in touch with me. And if you want to talk about the content of the programme, if you want to get yourself heard, your opinion, or if you want to talk to me in agreement, that would be novel, just email me, get in touch. Anyway, like I say, it's one of those things you've just got to do. Here's the adverts. And then we're going to go straight back to the rest of the interview with Mike Richards.
I want to talk to you about something that touches us all. It can save your life, but only when it's in good condition and when it fits. Scrubbers Leathers repairs, cleans and reconditions all race leather jackets and trousers. Call Damien on 08452 606 766 or go to scrubbersleathers.co.uk. And Debbie at the Leather Workshop can tailor your leathers to regain that perfect fit. All repairs and even custom badges and decoration. Call Debbie on 01142 687 555 or go to leather-workshop.co.uk. Gift vouchers are available.
So, do you like the rock music then, Mike?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I like rock music. Sort of favourite band is the Eagles, but I like all different types of music. But Eagles is probably.
But we're that sort of age, aren't we?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
So anyway, back to the plot. So you seem to be then pretty much concentrating on these the classic thing, and it's wonderful and beautiful. And if they're a healthy grid, why not? But what are you going to do about the top of the tree? Aren't you? Are you still making F2s?
No, not at current. I haven't made an F2 for a while now, and I've got no real plans to. I have inquiries, but I'm not really that interested. One of the reasons being that I fell out with the FSRA when they brought the LCR chassis out, as quite a few people know. I didn't think it was within the rules, and I still don't. I made a list of what was wrong with it, and basically put it forward. I contacted all the other manufacturers, Dave Molyneux, Shelbourne, Trevor, all the rest of it, and none of them could be bothered to back me. I also contacted Tony Baker. I had lengthy discussions with him about certain things on the LCR chassis, and I still deemed that it wasn't within the rules. So I rang the FSRA and they basically said put it in writing, and that, you know, they'd look at it and we would bring it up at the AGM. So I went to the AGM. I was there a couple hours earlier, and I was going to talk with Tony Baker about what I was going to say. And when I got there, Tony Baker was having a meeting with the FSRA about the LCR. And when he came down, the AGM proceeded. I put a written request in to discuss this thing. And at the end of the meeting, nobody said anything. So I brought it up. And after some heated conversations, the FSRA had decided that they were going to have a secret meeting at Donington Park, which they were going to look at the LCR and measure it and all the rest of it to see if it complied with the rules. So I said, well, who's going to do this? And at the time, the technical man was Keith Whiting, and he, in his wisdom, came out with that he had a designer friend who worked at Rover, and he would be looking at it. So I said, well, I want to look at it as well, or I want a representative. I've been in racing cars, F1, Indy cars. I wanted a designer to represent me, and they point blank refused.
See, this is, excuse me, it's almost unbelievable, because you've followed the rules, the corporate meeting rules, and you asked for an addition to the agenda, and the agenda didn't get altered, and it was in writing.
It was in writing, yeah, 2 months before the meeting.
Yeah. I find...
But there was other things, not just the chassis. There was the committee that looked at it. The chairman at the time was Steve Webster. Steve Webster, fantastic driver, got a lot of respect for him, but he was chairman of the FSRA. He was looking at it as well, but there was a conflict of interest. Steve was also selling the LCR.
Yeah, well, and that's supposed to be, one of the basic rules is that if you, all right, it's not a company, but it's run on company rules, and you can't have a conflict of interest at director level, can you?
Well, he did.
Yeah.
I took legal advice on it, and if I'd have had more money, I would have took him to court, and the solicitors said that I would have won, without a shadow of a doubt. The way that they structured it, it was corrupt, and there's no other word for it. It was corrupt. Yeah. And that's basically one of the main reasons why I stopped building F2s. I cannot deal with people who make the rules who are corrupt. I'm not saying now it's not the same.
It is a little bit in the past.
The chairman, like Mark Halliday is now the chairman of the FSRA. I like Mark. I raced against him many years. He's a nice man, and I don't think he's corrupt. I'm not saying individuals were corrupt at the FSRA. What I'm saying is the way that the system worked was corrupt.
Yeah.
And the technical man now who helps out on the FSRA, John Smith, like John, I have good chats with him, and we talk about things. But until things change, I am against the FSRA.
So, obviously, you heard my conversation with Pat,
yeah.
And I did say to her about the accessibility of Formula 2 and about the cost. But don't you think that, in the light of what you just said, that a restructuring would move the thing back to where it was supposed to be in the first place? If you rewrote the formula,
yeah. Well, the trouble is, people have spent too much money now. They've got the bikes. They spent a fortune buying their LCRs and buying all the Multec and all the rest of it. You cannot expect them to throw it away. They can't.
You can't do it in a single season, but don't you think that perhaps you could say, like I said last week, that we could maybe introduce a rule that the engine's got to be 5 years old, and obviously you need a more transparent formula for the chassis. But then you could perhaps run 2 series in parallel, and in 5 years, then we'd be up to speed again.
It's certainly worth looking at. But getting back to another thing that Pat says, that the FSRO don't make the rules. Yes, they do. They put proposals. The FSRA, people put a proposal into the FSRA, it gets voted on, or it's supposed to. A lot of it's done behind closed doors. and then they send it to the ACU. All they send it to the ACU for is rubber stamping.
But the ACU, of course, really, they're only interested in solos, aren't they?
I don't know about that, but what I'm saying is the FSRA put it to the thing and they rubber stamp it.
Yeah.
I would say 9 times out of 10 what is put to the ACU gets rubber stamped. And where she said that the FSRA will make the rules, I've been in them meetings where we used to vote and the rules were made there and then. So with saying that they don't make the rules is a load of rubbish.
Yeah, but you know as well as I do, Pat's spent a lot of time and done a lot of work for the FSRA, and essentially she's done a lot of work for me and you. But it's difficult.
Don't get me wrong. A lot of people put a lot of time into the FSRA, and as well as Pat, she's done. I wouldn't do it. She's done a fantastic job.
She's literally made it her life's work. I mean, she's
done it. Yeah, she's done a really good job. But what I'm saying is, it's like the technical side. The technical man should not be one man. It should be a subcommittee, and it should have either 3 or 5. It should have an odd number on it so that you can cast the vote.
Yeah.
And I've argued with people on the FSRA over technical issues, and basically one man's got the vote, and it's not correct. It shouldn't be like that. The whole FSRA needs restructuring.
Yeah. It's difficult to do in one hit.
Why?
Well, are you prepared to go on? I'm not talking about the FSRA, but can you give your time to be on a club committee? Because you're probably too good.
No, I haven't got the time. I work 7 days a week for 7 months a year. I haven't got the time. I'm flat out.
Yeah.
But I'm always on the end of a phone.
Yeah.
And this is what happens in the classics, as I said earlier on. If there's an issue with somebody's eligibility, Ian will ring me, he'll ring John Perkins, he'll ring John Simper, he'll ring somebody else, and then he will take a view on it.
Yeah, so it's like you said, it's a subcommittee almost, isn't it?
I've been offered the eligibility. I don't want it. No. Because all people will say is he's bending the rules to suit his bikes. I don't want to be involved. I want a black and white piece of paper with the rules on it, and I'll build the bike to it. Yeah. And that's the problem. One of the problems occurred with the LCR is because the rules were so vague.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I know that you're absolutely right. But formula racing has to have a formula, and you can't be vague. It has to be absolutely transparent.
Yes, it does, and it has to be, in my opinion, even with the classic, the rules still aren't tight enough.
Right. But Mike, on a sort of more positive note, isn't it true that the FSRA, with no money for staff, and they're all dedicating their own time, you know these people personally, don't you?
Yeah, and like I say, I've got a lot of respect for Mark Halliday, John Smith, who I know quite well. And yeah, I appreciate what they do. And even though I've had a lot of run-ins with the FSRA from a few years ago, hopefully as they get some new blood in and things change, you never know, perhaps I might go back and I might be an FSRA member. And like I say, they give their time for free. I wouldn't do it, and I'm glad that somebody does do it.
And we always need people, and they are the people for us at the minute, aren't they?
Yes, and it's well appreciated.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, thanks for talking to me, Mike. Thanks for letting me come here and look at all these great things that you've done. And I'll see you soon.
Thank you very much, Phil. All the best. And thank you very much for Biker FM for giving me this opportunity.
Well, we're going to be back, Mike. We're going to be back.
Oh, okay.
Right. Cheers.
Thank you.
Mike Richards, you've got to love him. He's absolutely straight as a die. Does exactly what it says on the tin. As a lot of you will know, I've only been in sidecars for the last 3 years. I started racing nearly 30 years ago. And I've done a lot of things, and I've spent a huge amount of money, and I don't begrudge it. But now, I just don't have the sort of money to run at the front. But I'm looking for a bike, so if anybody hears this who's got something in the shed that perhaps they're never going to race again, perhaps it's okay, perhaps it's damaged, perhaps it's got no motor, perhaps it's just completely filthy or incomplete, get hold of me, or you can get me on Steve's place, and maybe we can do something. Maybe I can just do it up for you and ride it a few times and give it you back. Who knows? Now, the few of you who've been following the show will know that I'm almost obsessed with the cost of racing and cutting that cost down. But I feel that I may have given some people the wrong impression, because I'm not talking about cutting the cost of the entry to the race, because that's something that isn't determined by us. That's something that's determined by the people who own the tracks, and you can't change that unless you can go out and buy a track, and there's not many people that we know that can do that. So that can't change. But what else can change? I'm not talking about cutting the cost of the membership to the clubs that we're in, because that can't change, because there are so many people, as we've said tonight, like Pat Hamblin, who have absolutely put in 1 million hours for this for nothing. And sure, people criticise them and say, oh, they get their expenses. Jesus, it just is not a drop in the ocean when you put in a lot of your time, when you get up in the morning, when you could very well stay in bed. So I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is formula racing, and all our racing is formula racing, because all our racing has to go into different brackets, and if you can't mix apples and pears, it's as simple as that. So what you can do, and what I feel that perhaps we should be looking at and considering, I'm not saying any definites, because there are a lot of opinions out here, we should perhaps think about changing the formula in some of the classes. And obviously I'm talking about the F2. The British F2 is a small competition, but the rules for that are the same rules for the TT, and those filter down into all the ordinary clubs. So just like I was saying earlier, the guys in the clubs and the guys running at the front of the club championships tend to have the same sort of equipment as those guys who are brave enough to put their heads above the parapet and go into the British. And so if we change the British, we change everything, or the TT, which way it works out. People say that the TT rules all British sidecar racing. I don't know. My interview with Mike, like every interview we've done on the show, things get forgotten, and he would like to make a dedication to his parents, Jen and Graham. His mum isn't very well, and he sends her his love and tells us all that she's always in his thoughts, and I'd like to send Jen and Graham my personal best.
Wow. What a show that was. Remember, if you or someone you know would make a good interview, get a hold of Slow Phil Direct on 077 307 84975 or email the man slowphil@steveenglish.com. Thanks for listening. I'm off to cool down and polish the bike.